Hello and welcome. This is David. Thank you very much for your time. Now we're going to have a look at the ego's use of guilt. Perhaps some of our concepts will become clearer and more personally meaningful if the ego's use of guilt is clarified. The ego has a purpose, just as the Holy Spirit has. The ego's purpose is fear, because only the fearful can be egotistic. The ego's logic is as impeccable as that of the Holy Spirit, because your mind has the means at its disposal to side with heaven or earth as it elects. But again, remember that both are in you. So both are within you, okay? And what we're being told here is that the ego has an amazing, impeccable level of logic, just as the Holy Spirit does, although its purpose is different. But I think the takeaway for me over there is that it only has one purpose. It's not to serve you, it's not to help you out, it's not to whatever. It is only fear. In heaven, there is no guilt because the kingdom is attained through the atonement, which releases you to create. Now, remember, whenever we say heaven, doesn't mean a place that is up in the skies. It's for the lack of a better word, a state of being, or it's who you really are. It is you. It's not a place as such that you can put a GPS coordinate on, or you can point up in the sky and say it's over there. Okay, I think that's it's just good to remember that, because logically I think we know that, but we kind of our brains have been trained or conditioned to think that heaven is a place you go when you die. You don't need to die to go to heaven. Okay? The word create is appropriate here because once what you have made is undone by the Holy Spirit, the blessed residue is restored and therefore continues in creation. We saw this in the last topic. Once your fearful projections are undone or reinterpreted by the higher mind, what is left is the blessed residue, the beauty that has always, you have been creating that as well. It's only that you have not seen it because the fear or the ego has covered it up. What is truly blessed is incapable of giving rise to guilt and must give rise to joy. This makes it invulnerable to the ego because its peace is unassailable. It is invulnerable to disruption because it is whole. Once again, in other words, even as you live a fearful life today, or a life that has points of fear and resistance and, all those kinds of things, you are still creating beauty, and that is not being destroyed by the miscreations. It's being saved for you. All right? Guilt is always disruptive. Anything that engenders fear is divisive because it obeys the laws of division. If the ego is a symbol of the separation, which it is also the symbol of guilt. Guilt is more than merely not of God. In other words, the cause is telling us, despite what our religions tell us, God will never make you guilty, never say you are guilty, never put you in a position where you are guilty, because you cannot be guilty, because you are part of Him or it or her. It's again English language. So the cause is saying guilt is more than merely not of God. It's not just not of God, but above and beyond that, it is the symbol of attack on God. So you see how that it's so sharp. We've now twisted guilt around. What this is saying is that the ego is the one that is a source of guilt. Is the one that's giving us the guilt, okay, or making us believe that we are guilty. And it is doing that because ego is one of the attacks on God. See? And then he goes on to say that this is a totally meaningless concept except to the ego. Because you cannot attack the Creator, you cannot attack God. How will you even manage to do that, you know? So it's a totally meaningless concept except to the ego, but do not underestimate the power of the ego's belief in it. This is the belief from which all guilt really stems. Okay? Because think about this. If, let's say, it is true that you are really part of God, the Son of God, one and the same, like you're one, you're not like a separated son of God, you know, you are one with God. That means if you're guilty, God is guilty. You cannot separate the two. Okay? That is why it is an attack on God. That is why it is useful to the ego, and that is why it produces fear. Because then you think you should be punished next. That's the next logical step, isn't it? The ego is the part of the mind that believes in division. How could part of God detach itself without believing it is attacking Him? That's what we've just said. We spoke before of the authority problem as based on the concept of usurping God's power. The ego believes that this is what you did because it believes that it is you. Now, here's something you have to remind of ourselves, right? The ego believes that it is you. And we all know now by this time that ego is not you. You are part of God. But the ego has taken that around and says, no, you are not part of God. You cannot be. You're guilty, worthless, no good, separate piece of little nothing, you know? And you are me, your ego. If you identify with the ego, you must perceive yourself as guilty. That's a natural outcome. Whenever you respond to your ego, you will experience guilt and you will fear punishment. Every single time you do that, that will be the end result. The ego is quite literally a fearful thought. It is literally a fearful thought. That is what the ego is. It is a fearful thought. It is not a separate being. It is not anything else. It is not it's not anything else but a fearful thought. However ridiculous the idea of attacking God may be to the sane mind, never forget that the ego is not sane. It represents a delusional system and speaks for it. Listening to the ego's voice means that you believe it is possible to attack God and that a part of Him has been torn away by you. Fear of retaliation from outside of you, from without, follows because the severity of the guilt is so acute that it must be projected. So check this out. Let's break this down. The ego is a fearful thought. Okay? It says that, hey, buddy, you are me. You are me. Hey, David, you are me. You're not part of God. You are me. You have separated from God. Okay? You have torn yourself away from God. And you're guilty. And because of this, there will be revenge. There will be punishment. And because there is no such thing, because of course God is not planning to revenge and attack you and whatever because of this insane thought. He's not insane as well. So he's not going to join the insane thought of the ego. So because that, punishment is not going to come from that side, what leads next is that you project the fear outside as an upcoming punishment. The guilt and the severity of the guilt is so acute that it must be projected by you. So, in other words, literally you're afraid of yourself. There's a quote that I once saw a long time ago that on the other side of fear is yourself. Once you walk through the fear, once you stop running away and resisting and dodging it and, belittling yourself and thinking it's so amazing that it could destroy you, once you face it and you walk through it, the only thing you find on the other side of fear is yourself. So you're literally fearing yourself, a projection of yourself. Okay, Whatever you accept into your mind has reality for you. It is your acceptance of it that makes it real. So if you don't accept it, it is not real. If you enthrone the ego in your mind, if you give it such high prominence, you're allowing it to enter, makes it your reality. This is because the mind is capable of creating reality or making illusions. I said before that you must learn to think with God. To think with Him is to think like Him. This engenders joy, not guilt, because it is natural. Guilt is a sure sign that your thinking is unnatural. So stop right there. Let's put it like this. Every time you feel guilty, kick yourself, or rather, remind yourself, hey, you're thinking in an unnatural way. Unnatural thinking will always be attended with guilt because it is the belief in sin. The ego does not perceive sin as a lack of love, but as a positive act of assault. All right, let's pause there. So the Course is telling us that sin is merely a lack of love. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a lack of love. And the way you solve sin is to give it love, not through punishment, not through anything else, just through love. Love conquers all. But the ego and all its children tells us that no, sin is an act of assault. It is an attack, and it needs to be punished. It must be punished. So those are the two distinctions you need to have there when it comes to the idea of sin, which is prevalent in all of us. No matter where you come from on this earth, there is an idea of sin. Of even if it's not a sin against God, sin against another human being. Like, you have wronged me, I have wronged you. That's what I mean by sin. So it doesn't have to be against some kind of a God or whatever. Okay? So the only distinction here is that the ego sees sin as a lack of love, whereas God sees sin as... the ego sees sin as an attack which needs punishment, which has to be punished, and God sees sin merely as a lack of love that is solved by love and never by punishment or otherwise. So this is necessary to the ego survival, looking at sin as an assault. This is necessary to the ego survival because as soon as you regard sin as a lack, you will automatically attempt to remedy the situation, and you will succeed. The ego regards this as doom, but you must learn to regard it as freedom. Wow, we've just been given some instructions, some help here. This is telling us that once you start accepting that all you're lacking is love, nothing more, then once you have accepted that, you will automatically attempt to fix the situation by opening up to love, not even by doing anything, by simply opening up to love, being receptive to love. And you will automatically succeed because it is natural to you. But this is threatening to the ego because it knows that will be the end of the ego. Therefore, the ego must confuse you about that point. But you must resist this. You must not listen to the ego, rather. And you must regard the opening up to love as freedom. The guiltless mind cannot suffer. Being sane, the mind heals the body because it has been healed. The sane mind cannot conceive of illness because it cannot conceive of attacking anyone or anything. Wow, this is really powerful. This is really powerful. Once you drop the guilt of the ego, the mind cannot suffer. Because it is now sane, it heals the body because the mind itself has been healed. The sane mind cannot conceive of illness. Here is again the reference that illness comes from an ill mind and not from, let's say, bacteria and germs. That's just another projection. the original root cause of illness is a sick mind. Okay. I said before that illness is a form of magic. It might be better to say that it is a form of magical solution. The ego believes that by punishing itself, it will mitigate the punishment of God. Wow. So, let's go back. A sick mind, one that believes in separation, one that has bought into the idea of guilt, okay? One that needs to be punished, one that projects that punishment. One of the ways that it projects punishment is through the concept of illness or disease. The reason why it does that is because it feels that by creating illness or disease, it is punishing itself because it needs to be punished because of the guilt, and therefore by doing so, it will avoid the greater punishment of God. Let's read on. Yet even in this, it is arrogant. It attributes to God a punishing intent, and then takes this intent as its own prerogative. That's true, there is some arrogance in that. It tries to usurp all the functions of God as it perceives them because it recognizes that only total allegiance can be trusted. Wow. So it doesn't want half, it wants all. I don't want half, I want all, everything. The ego cannot oppose the laws of God any more than you can, but it can interpret them according to what it wants, just as you can. That is why the question, what do you want, must be answered. You are answering it every minute and every second. And each moment of decision is a judgment that is anything but ineffectual. Each moment of decision is a judgment that is anything but ineffectual. Its effects will follow automatically until the decision is changed. Once again, this word of choice, decision, you must choose which side are you on. Remember though that the alternatives themselves are unalterable. So you have two choices. The results are unalterable. The choices are unalterable. The only thing you can do is choose between the two. The ego or the Holy Spirit. We know the fruits of the ego. We know the fruits of the higher self, the higher mind, the Holy Spirit. We know where each of them end. You have choice in that, but you don't have choice in. You can't take like both. You have to take one or the other, and you can't choose what each ends you, where each takes you. The alternatives themselves are unalterable. Yet its effects will follow automatically until the decision is changed. The Holy Spirit, like the ego, is a decision. Together they constitute all the alternatives the mind can accept and obey. Once again, the concept, there is only two choices. The Holy Spirit, like the ego, is a decision. Together they constitute all the alternatives that the mind can accept and obey. The Holy Spirit and the ego are the only choices open to you. God created one, so you cannot eradicate it. You made the other, and so you can eradicate it. So one can be eradicated. How cool is that? You can get rid of one. Only what God creates is irreversible and unchangeable. What you made can always be changed, because when you do not think like God, you are not really thinking at all. Once again, this statement, when you do not think like God, you are not thinking at all. Delusional ideas are not real thoughts, although you can believe in them, but you are wrong. The function of thought comes from God and is in God. As part of His thought, you cannot think apart from Him. Once again, you are part of His thought. You literally are a thought of God. Therefore, you cannot think apart from Him. Remember, we talked about the extension, that we are a thought of God and, image and likeness. So we think the same way, and in that way, we create the same way. in the same original thought. Irrational thought is disordered thought. God Himself orders your thought because your thought was created by Him. Guilt feelings are always a sign that you do not know this. Guilt feelings are always a sign that you do not know this. They also show that you believe you can think apart from God and want to think apart from God. So you actually want to think apart from God. Every disordered thought is attended by guilt at its inception and maintained by guilt in its continuance. Guilt is inescapable by those who believe they order their own thoughts. Again, that authority problem. Guilt is inescapable by those who believe they order their own thoughts and must therefore obey their dictates. Remember, the earlier sentence we just read said, God Himself orders your thoughts because your thought was created by Him. But now here we're saying that guilt is inescapable by those who believe they order their own thoughts. This makes them feel responsible for their errors without recognizing that by accepting this responsibility, they are reacting irresponsibly. Wow. If the sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself, and I assure you that it is, then the responsibility for what is atoned for cannot be yours. Wow, what does that mean? This is what it means. You have only one responsibility. Only one. And that is to accept the atonement for yourself. Nothing more. That's the only responsibility you have. Of course, we said there are vocations such as sharing the message and all that. But the responsibility, you're not responsible for another person accepting the atonement or anything else. You can do your part, you can share the message, but you're not responsible for the effects and the results. The only thing you're responsible for, the only thing, this is a very heavy word right now, responsible. You will not be held accountable for whether the 7 billion other people accept the atonement, whether the guy you talked to about the Course in Miracles even believed it. You will never be responsible for that. You don't have to care. If you speak and they don't like it, or they tell you to shut up, that's it. That's cool. You're not responsible. But you are responsible for accepting the atonement for yourself. But now, so the sentence goes on that the responsibility for what it is atoned for, or rather for anything else, is not yours. The dilemma cannot be resolved except by accepting the solution of undoing. You would be responsible for the effects of all your wrong thinking if it could not be undone. If it could not be undone, you'd be responsible, but it can be undone, so you're not. The purpose of the atonement is to save the past in purified form only. If you accept the remedy for disordered thought, a remedy whose efficacy is beyond doubt, how can its symptoms remain? In other words, all you'd have to do is accept the atonement and everything is done. The continuing decision to remain separated is the only possible reason for continuing guilt feelings. We have said this before but did not emphasize the destructive results of the decision. Any decision of the mind will affect both behavior and experience. Okay? What you want, you expect. This is not delusional. What you want, you expect. Okay? Your mind does not make your future, and it will turn it back to full creation at any minute if it accepts the atonement first. Once again, we're back to the same remedy. Accepting the atonement. It's an instant healer. An instant healer. Accepting the atonement. It will reverse and clear everything. It will also return to full creation the instant it has done so. Having given up its disordered thought, the proper ordering of thought becomes quite apparent. In other words, remember, thought is creative, or at least it projects. The minute you accept the atonement, disordered thought disappeared, and once again, the Holy Spirit or God arranges your thought, and instantly the behavior and the experience becomes apparent. In other words, all the results of disordered thoughts disappear, and heaven, or the state of ordered thought, is now your experience. So thank you very much for that. I think it was an interesting look at guilt and its purpose, and I hope at the very least you have taken, well, for me, if I could put this in a nutshell, I could say this: guilt is totally useless. There's never a need for guilt, ever, 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 ever. It is always a symptom of disordered thought, of our false allegiance. We are addicted to guilt. We think that every time, we like living in guilt, thinking, oh, I've done so wrong, I'm such a bad guy. We love guilt. It is never, ever, 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 ever useful, good, needed, necessary. There is not an exception. That is my take. So thank you, and see you in the next topic.